Hey guys, this is lecture number 3 for communication development and disorders. For this lecture, there are no note pages for you to take notes on. I just need for you to um, um, have your notebook and internet access because you are going to toggle between this lecture and 2 videos that are in the module on Canvas. So go ahead and get out your notebook. Make sure that you have put this in the table of contents. This is linguistic diversity. This is what this lecture is about. And then turn to your next clean note page in your notebook to take notes on this lecture. So these are the next 2 slides, yes, are words that we do not have in the English dictionary. I actually just found these on Pinterest one day and I thought they were really interesting. You can see the Italian word for the mark left on a table by a cold glass. We don't have a word for that in the English language. You can see in German there at the bottom, the feeling of being alone in the woods. Again, another word that we don't have in the English language. Here are 4. You can see Inuit. Up in Alaska, the feeling of anticipation that leads you to keep looking outside to see if anyone is coming. I don't know if I've ever felt that way, let alone have that word in our language. You can see in Spanish the time spent after lunch or dinner talking to the people you shared the meal with. You can start to see that language and culture really do hold hands. That I don't have that Inuit word in my language or that Spanish word because those are things that our cultures most of the time, mine, we do not have. Sadly enough, I really don't have any time spent between lunch or after lunch or dinner talking to people. Most of the time after lunch, it's get back to work, and after dinner, it's clean up the dishes. But you can see how many Spanish cultures take their time a little bit more. You can see down bottom left in Japanese, the sunlight that filters through the leaves of trees. I get this one. This is something that I have always thought about, and even as a young child, I made up my own word for it, and my mom thought I was completely nonsense. In Swedish, the road-like reflection of the moon on the water. Our culture, at least in our Cincinnati homes, most of us do not spend a good amount of time on the water to experience that, especially at night. And so this is just the first taste for me to have you guys really realize that culture and language go hand in hand. And if you are going to be a teacher in America, we need to learn how to be one with that and understand how to advocate for our kids who may be speaking a different language than the community that we're teaching in, or even learn how to properly understand and communicate with the families that our children come from. So let's dive in. The first thing I want you to do is watch a video that is in this module back on Canvas. The video is called English Language Learners, Culture, Equity, and Language. While you're watching that, I want you to write in your notebook 2 facts you learn, 1 good idea that you see in the video, and something that you think should be discussed in our class when we do meet up. This is a really good video just to kind of open our eyes a bit. I think a lot of us grew up in schools that most everybody spoke the same language we do, and as we will soon see, that is not so in classrooms that we are probably going to teach in future years. So pause this and then come back to me. Okay, so some things to consider. The way we think and view the world is determined by our language, and I think those images and the words that we talked about in the very beginning really prove this a bit, that a lot of times if I don't have a word for something, I'm not going to think about it as much or use it as much, or it even be culturally accepted. When I talked about how that there's a Japanese word for the light that kind of shimmers through the leaves of trees. My mom thought I was loony because I actually made up a word for that. And so the way we think and view the world is determined by our language. Children are more likely to succeed in school when the home language and the literacy socialization patterns are similar to those that are used and valued in schools. Something to think about this here. Let's say you are teaching a child, and at home they speak one language, and at school they speak another. That means it's going to be a little bit tougher for the child to learn that language. And then when you go in specifically, when I'm looking at the literacy socialization patterns, with those being the same, let's say our children come from a culture that they are not supposed to speak until they are spoken to. Well, in our classrooms, hopefully we are building an environment of discussion and just a language-rich environment. This is going to pose some problems for you because they have memorized or learned one rule set on how language works in their home. Something else, as teachers, we're required to enhance children's language development and encourage linguistic flexibility, which means, as we'll later see, it's not an issue, or it's not a negative thing if a child speaks one language at home and one language at school. In the very beginning, it might be more difficult for the teachers, but at the end of the day, when that child grows up, being bilingual is really going to help them. So look at these three things, and I want you to, yet again, pause this by looking at these three bullet points and tell me, what does this mean for educators? Write that in your notebook. If we really believe the way we think and view the world is determined by our language, that at home and at school, the literacy socialization patterns, if they're the same, that they're going to succeed more in school, and that we as educators are required to enhance children's language development, what does that mean for us in the classroom? Pause it, take down some notes, and then come back to me. Okay, I really have found over the past couple years that sometimes my undergraduate students don't really understand how diverse our country is, just because of the area that maybe you've grown up in was not that diverse and you haven't traveled that much, or the places you have traveled have looked like home. So here's just a really quick map of the United States. And something that, a phrase and a vocab word that you need to know is dialect. And a dialect is specialized variations of a language. So if you look at that, what country is that? We know that's the United States of America. What language is spoken? English. But even if we can agree to that, although I would say that there are huge chunks and swaths of this country that the primary language is not English, and especially in the schools, we can even leave campus and drive for at most 10 minutes, and the primary language in that school is not going to be English. Even if we just say, okay, United States is an English-speaking country, just by looking at that, this is showing different dialects for what my family calls soda. So if you look, the red areas of the country call the fuzzy, fizzy, sweet substance soda. The blue is pop. Green is Coke. Yellow is soft drink. Now, this might seem fun or who cares, but I will tell you that I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is definitely a blue pop region. And then I moved to Richmond, Virginia, which is about an hour and a half south of D.C., and it is definitely a red soda region. And when we first moved to Virginia, we were young adults just out of college, and I ordered a a meal at a restaurant with a pop, and the lady had no idea what I was talking about. Adult to adult, we could not figure out. She had no idea what I was saying. So something as easy as just ordering at a restaurant, talking to another adult, can be confusing. Just think how different dialects can be, or the variations of language can be when you're talking to children who are learning our English language, how different that they can be. Okay, so let's talk about Academic English Register. Sometimes you will see it as the letters A, E, R. This is something that I need for you to be able to use freely in your academic English register. I need for you to be able to use freely in your professional language. So more successful in mainstream workplaces is our academic English register. This is our the way that we speak when we are speaking to peers or in the workplace. If you can speak in your academic English register properly, you're more successful in schools. It has nothing to do with your ability to comprehend what you're speaking about. It is, can you use these properly formatted sentences with appropriate vocabulary words? So you can be more successful in schools, and you can be successful in mainstream workplace, but we do not want to lose our first language because a lot of times we will teach our kids that they need to always speak an academic English register, and that is the only right way, but it is not, because when they go home, they need to be able to speak to their communities as well. And so what we would really like is for them to have a switch. I can flip my academic English register on, and I can turn it off. Especially for our kids who it is completely polar opposite, their academic English register and the register they speak into their families or their communities. It actually can become dangerous if they speak in this educated workplace type language. It can really show or tell their peers that they're trying to pull away from their communities. So we actually want them to be able to speak both. Which, if you are in the classroom, you need to be able to speak both. My second year teaching was as a 5th grade teacher, and they didn't speak academic English register at home by any means. And so I had to slowly, over the course of that first year, learn what some of the words that they were using meant. Learn some of the verbiage. Was it proper? Not in the least, but I needed to know what they were saying. I needed to know what they were calling each other. I needed to know if they were being disrespectful for each other. And so the day I left the classroom, I can turn it on. And now when I spoke to parents, would I use my academic English register, or would I try more to speak how they spoke? I don't need to put on airs for anything. I was speaking what would be most comforting to them, most comprehensive to them, and so you need to learn how to speak the language your children are speaking at home, especially if it's just a dialect. Now, if it's Spanish, the more Spanish you know, the better. If it is something else, that's great. Learn as many words as you can. It's going to be more difficult to learn a whole language, but if it's just a different dialect, and that's something you see year after year in the same school that you serve in, start to learn it. Let's see. As grade levels increase, so does text-based instruction. And this text-based instruction is written in this academic English register. So what that means for our English as a second language kids is that even though they are maybe able to read, it's going to be more difficult to comprehend what they are reading. And so if you have an English as a second language learner child in your kindergarten classroom, that's going to be completely different because a lot of it is spoken, and that shared reference is being used. If they're talking about a certain book, the teacher's holding that certain book. But think about your science classes. A lot of that is text-based, and so you just have to know the language 10 times better than in those lower grades. Let's see. You need to encourage children to begin to examine where they use different language, where and why, and that's okay. That's what we should do as a teacher. Again, it's okay to switch back and forth. And the exact verbiage for being able to switch between informal and formal English, or like the dressed up English, is called code switching. Being able to flip back and forth, back and forth. Some people would say this is not a good thing. I completely disagree. I think code switching is a way to be able to be rooted in your community and also be successful in that mainstream workplace. So I want you to pause this for a second, and I want you to reflect. What does this mean for our English as a second language kids if our grade levels increase? As grade levels increase, so does their text-based instruction. What are the pros of Academic Register and the cons of Academic Register? I want you to tell me, because we're going to be talking about this. You're basically filling out your Socratic Seminar worksheets now. I want your thoughts. I want to talk about it. And then what is our jobs as educators? So pause this, answer those 3 questions, and then we're going to flip open this notebook and talk about this when we meet together in class. So pause this and then come back to me. Okay, last thing we're going to talk about is bilingualism, and that is the idea that a child can speak multiple languages. Once it was the thought that students could not learn as easily if they were bilingual. We now know that that's completely untrue. For children ages 8 to 12, they learn a second language more quickly than children do ages 4 to 7. So between that 8 to 12 range, children can really pick up a second language quite easily, which is also interesting when we teach second languages in our American school structure. I took Spanish as a freshman in high school and was horrible at it. I would like for you to pause this here in a second, and I want you to watch this video. It is a very dry video, but some really good stuff is said, I promise. This video makes me giggle every time I see it, but it is in the module, back on Canvas. It is titled Bilingual Speech Language Pathology. Watch it. Even though the guy is super dry, watch it, and I want you in your notebook to write 2 facts that you learned and something that you think should be discussed in our class, because even though it's spoken quite dryly, there are some really good facts in there.